We welcome in Jeremy Birmingham from LettermanRow.com. And Jeremy, it was a week off for Ohio State, which meant we had to find some way to fill the void. And so for some national pundits, that meant coming up with an idea that Urban Meyer was going to retire after this season. And Urban vehemently denied it on Monday, saying he plans to coach next season, plans to coach Ohio State next season. But this is a story that really isn't going to go away until Urban Meyer is coaching Ohio State next season.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is one of those things where people started talking about this in August, and they wanted this to be his last year. And so now the story's kind of taken life of its own because he had the sideline incident against Indiana where he looked a little off and said he's having the headaches that he suffered years ago with the arachnoid cyst in his brain that had caused a procedure back in 2014. So now I think people are just kind of looking and finding holes to poke in pretty much anything he says. So I think there's a undercurrent of people who really want him to retire and want him to step away just so they can be proven right, even without any real regard for his true intention or his health or anything like that. So I think it was important for Urban Meyer on Monday to step up and answer the question and say, yes, absolutely, I plan on being here at Ohio State next year and beyond. Whether or not that happens, I guess we don't know, but we'll see what goes on from here. Urban certainly has not looked and acted himself in the last few weeks, and I think everybody who's been around him has seen that, although he did look a little bit better on Monday, a little more spry. Maybe that week off was pretty needed for him.
Oh, and it all goes back to recruiting. Everything with Ohio State program, everything with Urban Meyer goes back to recruiting. You are so well plugged into the recruiting scene. Is that something that recruits are picking up on these rumors as well?
I don't think so, not yet. I mean, I think they read it, they know about it, they hear it out there. They're certainly hearing it from other coaches around the country. But because Urban Meyer personally, in his interpersonal communication with the kids and their families, there is not any concern. Any of the Ohio State commitments, the 14 kids currently committed in the class of 2019, are not worried. They're not expressing any concern. Nobody's looking around and waiting for another shoe to fall. Maybe part of that's because they do know that Ryan Day is a capable replacement if something were to happen. But I don't think anybody's worried about Urban Meyer throwing up his hands and saying, I quit. I think people understand that if there is something going on, that it's probably something he needs to take care of, and if and when he does, then he'll be back in charge. So I think it's an opportunity for Ohio State to say, hey, no matter what happens, there's continuity here. Urban Meyer's program isn't going to change dramatically, even if Urban Meyer, as we saw at the start of the 2018 season, isn't there immediately, because he's the type of guy, and what he's built there is designed around him. It's a system, not a man in charge of it.
One of the recruits Ohio State very much is looking at for 2019 is a defensive end out of Olentangy Orange, Zach Harrison. Now, if Olentangy Orange sounds familiar for Northwest Ohio folks in the last couple of days, that's because they are going to be at Whitmer Friday night in the opening round of the postseason. So it's going to be a great chance for local folks to get an eyeball look at this Zach Harrison, who Ohio State wants him, Michigan wants him, Penn State wants him. He's a five-star, just an athletic freak who has had a little bit of an up-and-down senior season because of some injury concerns, but he is really one of the top recruits in the nation at this point.
Yeah, Zach is the number 5 overall recruit in the country overall for prospect. I want to be very clear, because what we're talking about is prospecting, how a kid develops. Because if you watch game tape, you might think that Kevon Butler at Toledo Whitmer is a better player right now than Zach Harrison, even though they're different styles of players. Zach is more of an outside guy. I think that Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State are seeing him 6'6", 250 pounds. He runs a 4.5. He can jump out of the gym. He does everything you want physically. They see what he can develop into. But as you mentioned, it's a great opportunity not just for Ohio State fans, but also for Michigan fans who are in the area that want to take a look at what could be coming their way. And for Buckeye fans to see Kevon Butler, who is obviously now a player Ohio State's been talking to a lot. He's going to make his official visit to the school in 3 weeks. So it's a really interesting game from a prep recruiting standpoint, but also it should just be a great game because Orange is playing significantly better since Harrison returned to the field. He missed their first 3 games of the year, so they're 7-3 now, and they didn't win in those first 3 weeks. So it's been a big change for them.
Oh, and Whitmer is also playing better football now as well. Their schedule a little bit front-loaded. They're starting to get a little bit healthier too. So that should be an interesting game that you'll be able to see right here on BCSN on Friday night. Ohio State had the week off after the debacle at Purdue, and Urban Meyer certainly talked a lot about Monday about the things they needed to work on, which is no surprise to anybody who's been paying attention to Ohio State football for the last month. Running the ball, red zone offense, and tackling better, getting guys down in space. Those are the areas of concern. In a week's time, can those be addressed? They certainly can be addressed, and we won't know if they'll be fixed until Saturday against Nebraska.
Yeah, I don't even know if we'll know they're fixed on Saturday against Nebraska. They may not be known if it's fixed until Michigan State or Michigan, because Nebraska, similar to Minnesota, Indiana, is a program that Ohio State should be able to beat even if they're not at their best. I think that some areas, the tackling concerns, for example, Ohio State missed 20 tackles against Purdue, which is an absurd number. That's not a matter of needing to fix it. That's just guys needing to want it a little bit more. This isn't it's not a technique issue. It's guys simply being out of place and being out athleted at that moment. The running game, stuff like that, again, I think that a lot of that's just attitude for Ohio State. It's that big front five going out there and pushing people around. And then beyond that, the defense, and Greg Schiano talked about it last Wednesday at the Woody Hayes. They're saying, hey, this is not a schematic issue. This is all about execution and anybody who's watched Ohio State this year does know that there are some problems with execution, but it's hard to watch it and not think it's a schematic issue. So we'll see if they're making adjustments. Urban Meyer on Monday did say Shaun Wade will probably start at safety against Nebraska. Really, for the Buckeyes, it's about getting used to life without Nick Bosa. Everyone else is healthy. Everyone's back. Damon Arnett will be back. Jonathan Cooper's back. Jordan Fuller, Isaiah Pryor, everyone should be there. Jeffrey Okuda's back. He missed the end of the Purdue game. Obviously, Austin Mack is out, as we talked about last week. But this is an opportunity for Ohio State, a noon game at Ohio Stadium. The blackout, the black jerseys, black uniforms that they're going to be wearing look really great. Now it's about the Buckeye football team showing up and playing great.
Any irony in the fact that they're wearing black uniforms against Nebraska, who for years called their defense the black shirts and had a vaunted defense? And so far this season, the offense starting to come along for Nebraska, but the defense has a lot of question marks for Scott Frost in his first year back in Lincoln.
I don't think it was an intentional thing for Nebraska. I think this.
So it's not like when Ohio State wore the so-called cocaine whites at Penn State a few years ago?
Certainly not. This is not a situation where Ohio State wanted to play this game at noon. This is supposed to be a night game. It's supposed to be, similar to how they did 2 years ago against Penn State, or I'm sorry, 3 years ago against Penn State at night around Halloween. They wanted it to be a blackout for Halloween. So that's not going to be the case. Instead, it's going to be a noon blackout, which is normally something reserved for Ohio State students.
Well, it goes back to our days in high school and Blackout Sun and Soul Asylum and all sorts of grunge music that most people don't even realize existed anymore.
Yeah, but let's see if Ohio State can just black out the memories of Purdue and move forward, because that's really what the Buckeyes have to do. They can't focus on Purdue anymore. That game happened. It's over. It was embarrassing. Now you just have to move forward. And I think that Nebraska presents to them an opportunity to fix issues on both sides of the ball, because, as you mentioned, the Cornhuskers offense is really starting to pick it up. True freshman quarterback Adrian Martinez is a guy Ohio State really liked and was close to taking a year ago, but he did not play his senior year because of a knee injury, and so the Buckeyes sort of backed off of him and then went after Matthew Baldwin, who then ironically suffered a knee injury in his last game of his high school career, so then they're still in the same position. But Martinez is a mobile kid, can move. I think that similar to how Michigan played against Nebraska, Ohio State is aware of what Scott Frost and the Nebraska athletic director said preseason, which is basically that teams like Ohio State and Michigan aren't going to want to schedule Nebraska. And I think that's kind of stuff. If you're talking about irony, maybe we talk about that on Saturday night when you see what happens. But I think, and I'm expecting Ohio State to go out and really put things together this weekend.
One of the weapons Adrian Martinez has is J.D. Spielman. If that name sounds familiar, it should. That is the nephew of Chris Spielman. It's Rick Spielman's adopted son. And when Urban Meyer was asked about J.D. Spielman on Monday, he drew some comparisons, some favorable comparisons to Purdue's Rondale Moore.
Yeah, if you remember last year, the Ohio State-Nebraska game was a blowout, as it's been the last couple. But J.D. Spielman gave the Buckeyes some fits a year ago, and I expect them to try to focus on him offensively, similar to the way Purdue used Rondale Moore. Not necessarily in the same style of routes and all that stuff, but the idea is get him the ball and let him work. So the Buckeyes will need to be prepared for that. They don't have a lot of other options. True freshman running back Maurice Washington at Nebraska is a very explosive kid. So that's one thing to look at. But this is about Ohio State out-physicaling Nebraska, because that's what they should do.
You're saying Ohio State's got more talent than Nebraska. Ohio State's deeper than Nebraska. Yet you could say the exact same things 2 weeks ago against Purdue. I think we said those exact same things 2 weeks ago against Purdue. Why will this be different for Ohio State than it was against Purdue?
We've seen it through Urban Meyer's tenure when the Buckeyes do lose a game, that things sort of have a history of being righted and quickly. I don't know if it's a wake-up call exactly, but I think that it's obviously a moment where there are 85 players on the Ohio State roster that could play at any school in the country. There are 4 or 5 guys at Nebraska who could play at Ohio State right now. So what it comes down to is 85 guys and their 10 assistant coaches understanding that you're not entitled to anything at Ohio State just because you play for Ohio State. And I think sometimes that does get lost. It's one of the most impressive things about what Nick Saban does at Alabama. They never seem to have those letdowns. And I think that sometimes when you're dealing with young kids who are that talented, every once in a while you need to get slapped in the face. And I think that what we've seen from Ohio State in recent years is that when that happens, they've been better. And that's why I expect this weekend to start righting the ship for the Buckeyes.
Granted, there haven't been that many losses at Ohio State for Urban Meyer, but when he's lost in the regular season, they have won every time following that regular season loss, 5-0. We'll see if they can make it 6-0 Saturday afternoon at the Shoe. I want to thank once again Jeremy Birmingham from LettermanRow.com for joining us on UA Local 50 College Football Weekly.